Namaste. श्री अरविंद और स्वामी विवेकानंद को तीन प्रकार से हम अप्रोच कर सकते हैं जब भी उन दोनों को साथ में हम रखते हैं। एक है श्री अरविंदो एंड स्वामी विवेकानंद, तो वहाँ पे हम दोनों के स्पेशल मीटिंग पॉइंट्स और डिफरेंसेस इनको लाके सामने प्रकट करते हैं। We take up both of them together and we compare that what are the common meeting grounds and what are the differences. Another way to approach Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo is Sri Aurobindo or Swami Vivekananda. Well, obviously there is nothing from Sri Aurobindo to Swami Vivekananda because he had left his body just when Sri Aurobindo was rising on the firmaments of the Indian and the world's horizons. A third approach is to see them as two stages of India's and the world's spiritual destiny. And I find that a best way to look at them, if I were to use a comparative analogy, I would say that Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo as the morning star and the sun. One comes at night but announces about the beauty of the future or brightness that is going to emerge, and the other is the sun that rises effulgent into the sky. So Swami Vivekananda, when he comes, that time Indian spirituality or spirituality in general has either degenerated into religious tendencies or it has withdrawn into the caves out of ascetic tendencies and illusionism. And at that point Swami Vivekananda comes and with his leonine roar sets the world on fire. Literally, if we read through Swami Vivekananda, one of the key things that one comes across is when we read in the Upanishads, Brahman is fearless, nirbhayo. Here is a man who is fearless because he is one with Brahman. Can Brahman die? Not at all. And we see this in one of the beauty, and he goes beyond all that has been told so far. You know, he was an iconoclast. Just like, he was supposed to be a gaze from the eye of Shiva. So he broke many of the old system, as I was hearing what Manoj Bhai was saying, break all idols, worship the one God who dwells on all beings. A wideness which breaks all systems. But when he was breaking the systems, like Shiva, he was liberating them from the trappings in which they were caught. So Sri Aurobindo quotes once when he quotes this about Swami Vivekananda, that when he was asked by an audience that, sir, but Shankara does not say so. And Swami Vivekananda says, well, yes, but Vivekananda says so. And Sri Aurobindo says, if somebody looks at it from the ordinary eye, it will look like a gigantic egoism. But it is not egoism, it's just the plain fact of his existence. One who is dwelling in Brahman, how does he live? How does he dwell? He was answering the question of the Gita. He was not just stating a philosophy, he was living it. And that's why we find in his works it's not just luminous, but it is a living truth, which we find embodied in Swami Vivekananda's teachings, whatever he wrote, whatever he spoke. It's a living power that we see in it. So what exactly is Swami Vivekananda's basic teaching? Number one, which obviously he came to awaken the world. One thing where we find both carried the work together, but one taking it to its fulfillment. Swami Vivekananda was the seed sower. That's how Sri Aurobindo says. He sowed the seeds into this world of a future, which he could foresee somewhere. But it was given to Sri Aurobindo to fulfill it. So what were the seeds he sowed toward the future? The first seed that he sowed was that India, wake up to your own strength. And this was important not only for awakening the world to the spiritual truth, but of awakening India to its own reality. Without winning the inner Swaraj, how could we ask for outer Swaraj? So in that way, he was just approaching the whole freedom movement from within outwards, which is what we see with Sri Aurobindo. He is taking it from within outwards. Or there were so many revolutionary, movements or attempts to free India from the British. But what was the reason why India didn't become free? Because we had lost the inner Swaraj. Spirituality had it had cast itself into thin and narrow streams, and
it had cut itself from the world. Now, when Vivekananda goes to Chicago and when he says, what he said about India, that I am proud to come from a land which believes that man is divine by his nature. He's not a fallen being. It shook the whole world. As Sri Aurobindo says, he held the whole world in the hollow of his palms. So, this was Vivekananda who reminded the world of what India is, what India was, what India is, and what it still can be. Without strength, it is strength that attracts strength. And without awakening this strength of India, the Shakti, there was no way that India could have become free. So we understand why all this oppression, which was needed from the larger perspective of God's plan, why the divine made India go through what he made India go through. Why for hundreds of years India remained subject to other nations, other civilizations, because its spiritual tendencies had gone into a monastic Advaitism, a kind of illusionism, right from Shankara, Buddha, and so on and so forth, and countless saints and sages. Wonderful they were, but they were more like stars on the horizons of the night, drawing us afar, maybe guiding us with their pointing light. But what about the living truth? So Swami Vivekananda is the first person who revealed to the world what India is, breaking all the systems and releasing the truth, the kernel of spirituality. And along with that, he is the one who set a bonfire. It's a very interesting paradox. Both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda went beyond religions. But Sri Ramakrishna did it by finding a way of synthesis, that there is a common element through which all religions can lead us to God. But Swami Vivekananda, in this sense, he realized the limitations of the religious mindset. And he knew the age that is dawning is calling us to go beyond religions. And therefore, he, like an iconoclast, he breaks them from their outer molds and liberates the spirit within. So this is another thing which we find very beautiful in Swami Vivekananda, which also resonates with Sri Aurobindo. The second thing which he came to show to the world, that man, wake up. And his one message, if there is a message, was strength and courage. Wake up to your own strength within. In a world where we are always taught to rely on this person, that person, destiny, fate, what was, even now, there is this too much insistence on karma, destiny, past. You are bound as if in a machine. And Swami Vivekananda liberated us from not only from ignorance, but from this bondage to our own thoughts that we are bound. And he comes and reminds us that, look, you have chosen to be bound, you can be free, and all the courage is within you, the strength is within you, the strength to realize is within you. So in this sense, we see something very interesting about Swami Vivekananda. Outwardly, he wore the monk's garb, and he did preach a kind of asceticism. But inwardly, Swami Vivekananda is essentially a karma yogin. He goes all around the world and reveals the secret truths of, action in the world. He is the one who preaches something very interesting, that for a moment set the Gita aside and teach the youth of India to play football. Let there be nerves of steel. It is very interesting that what a combination he is. That on one side he is a spiritual man and he says, with what force and freedom, keep the Gita aside. Was he saying that the Gita is nothing? No, not at all. When we read through Swami Vivekananda's work, and that's, I must say, is so important, because just like with Sri Aurobindo and the mother, we should see all the writings in general, all his letters, all his speeches, everything, to know the drift. If one reads only this writing, one may say, oh, he's advising us to leave the Gita aside. He's not saying that. He's saying that there is this panditya, this scholarly wisdom, where we are lost only in the words, the terminologies, and the play of words. Set it aside and liberate within yourself the strength. After all, that is the message of the Gita, that the divine dwells within us and we should uncover him. There is a path to reach him. So this we find in Swami Vivekananda, that he liberates things from their trappings and reminds us of the strength which is within us and which can carry us very far. The third thing which we find in Swami Vivekananda, which again Sri Aurobindo carries to its ultimate fulfillment, is that wideness. That wideness is very interesting. In that wideness, we see that he includes all humanity in the scope of his liberation. And Sri Aurobindo very beautifully in Synthesis of Yoga reminds us, he quotes three particular instances of beings who are freed themselves, but yet they continue to act in the world to free all others. And one of them, of course, is Buddha, who turns away from the threshold of nirvana, and he says that how can I step into the Mahanirvana where all is dissolution as long as there is one human soul suffering in ignorance. And we know that Buddha had a tremendous, powerful, vital personality. Hardly anybody can match his intellect and the strength of his vital. Then comes, conquest of desire, ego is not an easy thing. So that strength is very different, and that's exactly what Swami Vivekananda's strength is, not physical but moral, spiritual. The second is the prayer from the Bhagavad, where the poet or the rishi says that how can I seek my own liberation? I would rather come back to earth 1,000 times. And same thing we see in Swami Vivekananda, where he says, I would want to come to this world 1,000 times and be among and worship the one God, God the poor, God the deprived, God the ignorant who has become all this. So we see this wonderful, powerful invocation of the deity within man, which is what probably struck the West most, because before that, God was otherworldly, he was somewhere elsewhere, whom man had to worship. And Swami Vivekananda brought him to earth, seated him once again where his real place is, within the heart of man. Of course, we can find him in the temples, the mosque, and the churches, but the place where we have to find him is in the heart of man. And that's where we see Swami Vivekananda beautifully once again awakening God in the heart of man. Who was he? Well, he belonged to that class of beings who are Nitya Mukt. That's how Sri Aurobindo describes. So Nitya Mukt are beings who have gone to a higher plane because they are liberated. And they can come down and go back to do a work. So he was somebody who was a Nitya Mukt. Not, and Jivan Mukt is the slight difference. They are free, obviously, when they are acting, but they have realized liberation and they come down and go back. And since we are talking about Nitya Mukt, Sri Ramakrishna spoke of them as the Ishwar Koti and the Jeev Koti. So Swami Vivekananda belonged to the Ishwar Koti. And those who are Ishwar Koti, they may, on earth, they may be with everything, but they are not bound by it, not stained by it. That's their beauty, because they are inwardly always free. And that's what we see in Swami Vivekananda's personality. If you look at his outer personality, we may not understand many things. For instance, his anger. There is a very interesting, touching little episode of Sister Nivedita. When she comes and meets Sardama. She says that, it is a strange paradox I find in him. The paradox is that when he speaks about Brahman, he is vast, infinite. We cannot even imagine. He takes us to such heights and widenesses. But when somebody says something against India, oh, look at Swamiji, he folds his, sleeves and he's about to give him a punch. I just don't understand how come he can get angry. And Sardama tells something very interesting. She says, this little anger is given to him as a veil of Maya so that he can act in the world. Otherwise, he won't live in the world. That's what Sri Ramakrishna told about Swami Vivekananda, that the day he realizes who he is, he'll just go away. So there is a difference between this outer personality and his inner being, which is towering into the magnificent heights. And that's, when somebody before Swami Vivekananda had gone to, on his tour to America, someone complained to Sri Ramakrishna that, look here, you praise Naren so much, and you take him to what heights, but he can eat meat, he can do this, and what is so great about him? So he had not yet traveled, and in a prophetic vein he said, oh Naren, even if he goes out and sits with people who are taking wine and meat, he would remain untouched and pure. This was Swami Vivekananda, a Nitya Mukt. Now, he had come to prepare the field for something else which was to come. So like the morning star, he came in the night and showed the touch of light, the first glimmer. And with that, the soul of India awakened. But the work was not over. He had just started the work. He had initiated. He was an initiator, not one who would fulfill it, because that was to be done with someone else. And that's where we see the transition from Swami Vivekananda to Sri Aurobindo. It is very interesting that if you see Sri Aurobindo's writings and the what people, just now we heard about Swami Vivekananda coming to Sri Aurobindo in the jail. So in the jail, we see that apart from other personalities, primarily Shri Krishna and Swami Vivekananda comes to him. Sri Krishna lays down the broad foundation of the future with regard to Sanatan Dharma and what else to follow. And Swami Vivekananda comes, and like the great rishis who are standing on the high peaks of wisdom on the Mount Everest, he points out towards the sun, towards which everything must climb, towards which he himself has to travel. That sun, which alone can finally create the synthesis which is needed. Both Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna were creating that synthesis. But the synthesis between material world and the highest world, that and the action of the higher consciousness, all this he showed to him because he was standing on that luminous realm, the Swar Lok, if one may call it. And from the Swar Lok, he was pointing the way to the Mahar Lok, towards which Sri Aurobindo would eventually climb. So this entire episode in the Alipur jail, it's a different thing altogether. That Sri Aurobindo later on said that it was a part of his mind because the influence remains for a long time when beings like him leave the physical body. As he said to one of his disciples, I have spat out my body, which was in the great Upanishadic vein. So, very clearly, he, in the end, did eventually, toward the end, we see in Swami Vivekananda's life, he did what he had to do. He had sown the seeds. He had awakened India to the great spiritual work, to its own spiritual strength, to the cry of Swaraj. But toward the end, we see last 1 year or so, we see that Swami Vivekananda speaks in a very touching letter. He says, you know what, I am still that little child sitting at Sri Ramakrishna's feet, longing to be lost in that infinite ocean of peace and bliss. He longs for that. He had gone into the world and shaken the world by the storm and thunder and roar of Indian spiritual might. And then he longs to be like a child who is into the mother's arms. We see this another very interesting tendency. Swami Vivekananda is a Vedantin, but basically in his heart he is a Shakt because he comes from the Shakti tradition. Same thing we see in Sri Ramakrishna, a beautiful synthesis of Tantra and Vedanta. Before that, we don't find this kind of synthesis. There is the Tantric approach and there is Vedantic approach. But the difference is, Sri Ramakrishna uses Tantra as a means of ascension toward the ultimate Vedantic truth. Whereas we see in Sri Aurobindo using Vedanta as a starting point to enter into the finality of the Tantra, which is about redeeming this world and matter. So, Swami Vivekananda's coming to Sri Aurobindo in the jail is, in a way, the entire past traditions which he had summarized within it and broken the outer shell, liberated it from all the trappings, the religious trappings, the ideological trappings, the trappings of philosophy, systems and all that. He shows to Sri Aurobindo that this is your work, now carry on from here. So we see that Sri Aurobindo taking up from Swami Vivekananda and of course Sri Krishna the work toward the future. This is the background, and what that work toward the future is, that we find in Sri Aurobindo, which of course goes far beyond traditional Vedanta, traditional Tantra. It is not just to redeem our human soul and to uncover its divine nature. Of course, Swami Vivekananda said that all of us deep within have a divine nature. And when we get rid of ignorance, we discover it. But this divine nature cannot express itself through the outer being, through the body, through the instruments which are given to us. And Sri Aurobindo takes it from there and says, no, until the instruments and the outer man also changes, there is no way that there can be a possibility of divine life upon earth. So he takes up that work of the ages which has been left undone. In fact, untouched rather. It is to that which Swami Vivekananda referred when he said that human nature is like a dog's tail and you cannot straighten it by any means. So this he was referring not to the deepest nature, which is of course divine, but to the surface nature of man, proneness to anger, proneness to other things which we find expressed in humanity. But Sri Aurobindo takes it up and says until this changes, there is no possibility of divine life upon earth. This is what we find in Savitri. The moment Sri Aurobindo enters that realm of the new creation, he suddenly experienced this change. His soul was all in front like a sea. So that truth of being which is within, the true divine nature, comes out and starts spreading into the world, and the actions start, the instruments have to change. That is a process which has begun subsequent to that. So, in a way, we can say that what Swami Vivekananda sowed the seeds, he showed the way toward the future. Sri Aurobindo takes it from there and takes very, very far towards its culmination and fulfillment. So, that's what Sri Aurobindo meant when he said that do not forget that we derive also from Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna. So, it's that taking up of a work, just like taking up of the work from the Gita. But equally, we would make a mistake if we take the two as a similar kind of thing. It's the same thing like when people take up the Gita and Sri Aurobindo, and because they know that Sri Krishna is Sri Aurobindo and Sri Aurobindo is Sri Krishna, they believe that the Gita's message is what Sri Aurobindo gives. And Sri Aurobindo made it very clear that the Gita does not give the whole message of Sri Aurobindo. There is something which he adds, something which he brings, something which is crucial, like the most important element. And that element is the transformation of nature, which is not there in any of the previous saints, vibhutis. And this he could do. The reason for that is that Vivekananda is a Nitya Mukti, he is a vibhuti. He is a vibhuti of Shiva. And like Shiva, he has the raw respect and one who breaks all formal traditions. Shiva is a great iconoclast. That's why Daksh Prajapati doesn't like him. So he breaks all those traditions which are there belonging to that. So he is a vibhuti. And vibhuti comes to bring great revolutions in the world. But the avatar comes to bring the great evolution of the world. So within that tamas, he woke up that rajas and connected that rajas to the spiritual force of India. This was needed because before Swami Vivekananda we see that people are lying in a state of tamas, so he awakens rajas out of it and then connects it to the spiritual force of India. That's we see in his insistence on brahmacharya and all these things, that power which is within man. And then that rajas has to be taken to its ultimate fulfillment and transformed into chit tapas. So this was the work which Sri Aurobindo takes forward. That is the essence. And we will read some of the passages. One of the passages which is from Swami Vivekananda, and there are many, but one of the one which appeals to me beautifully and gives the essence. His essence was realize who we are. This was the essence of Swami Vivekananda. But how that realization will mold and cast itself into life, that he did not much give shape to. He did speak about education, he did speak about women empowerment, but he did not lay down the lines. He was somebody who, out of the formless, drew some sketches. But these sketches, somebody else had to come and give form and expression to these sketches. So he was like that. And one of the famous examples is that, Sister Nivedita recounts in her wonderful book, The Master as I Saw Him. So when he would go to England, 10, 12 people will attend, and she once tells him that, why do you give such talks without giving any methods and concrete ways and techniques, and you just give talks which are very inspiring and inspired, but a lot of people don't come because they want to know what is to be done. And Swami Vivekananda said, let them awaken to the truth within and it will organize itself. He said that fixing of things into a fixed mold, casting things into a rigid system, that he did not do. Even though he has a mission, Sri Ramakrishna mission is something which has been directly inspired by him, and there were many others who were not in favor of it. But he refused to give certain fixed method. Though when we look at it, he speaks about concentration, meditation. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which is a master book, the mother had, read it before she came here. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which have been translated, translated means which have been from Sanskrit to English by Swami Vivekananda. It's an excellent book. So he speaks about these methods. He speaks about things passingly, but not as a fixed formal method. And that we see in Sri Aurobindo also. And the reason is that both Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo believe that if you release the kernel of truth within, the spiritual truth, it will express itself in countless ways in different human beings. So that's what Swami Vivekananda meant when he said that a day will come when each man will have his own religion, his own path, the widest possible formula of spirituality ever given. And same with Sri Aurobindo. The moment you give a fixed method, a fixed system, then or a fixed thought also, then you are systematizing it and finishing it of its wideness. Both were in touch with the infinite. One can see it from their writings and their speeches. But Sri Aurobindo also refused to fix his thought into a fixed, formal, rigid, narrow system, because then it tends to become a dogma. So it's very amazing. A lot of people find this very difficult about Sri Aurobindo, that why doesn't he give something fixed, like a do this, don't do this, like a formula. But he refused to do it, because the moment you do it, you finish the whole truth. The truth is infinite, and it will express itself in infinite ways in numberless human beings. The world is not created for a monotone. The moment we say a fixed system which everybody must follow, it's a monotone. But release the truth and let it take shape. But the difference is that Sri Aurobindo spoke about this releasing of the truth and shaping of a life should be through the dynamic impulsion of the divine Shakti. That's where the mother comes in, and open to the mother became the Mool Mantra of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. So one of the passages where Swami Vivekananda says the gift of strength and self-reliance. This is find so wonderful when people are going through depression and they don't believe in God. It doesn't matter. Believe in yourself. He would say, believe in yourself. Believe in destiny. Believe in God. If you cannot believe in any of them, have faith in yourself. Why have faith in ourselves? Because we are anshas, portions of the infinite. We carry the flame within. And if we believe in ourselves, we'll end up finding the way towards fulfilling the dreams. No fear. Brahman am I. Fear not. Infinite is your courage. Limitless your capacity. You are the very Brahman. Awake in the being of the Brahman within you. Know who you are and what you are. You will blow off the illusion of attachment to the small and the petty. Sri Aurobindo so beautifully. O force-compelled, fate-driven, earth-born race, O petty adventurers in an infinite world and prisoners of a dwarf humanity, how long shall you tread the circling tracks of mind around your little self and petty things? But not for a changeless littleness where you mend, not for vain repetition where you build. Almighty powers are shut in nature's cells. It goes to that extent that not just in the individual, in each cell, in each atom of existence, the almighty powers are there. There is a little here something very interesting, this regarding power. While Swami Vivekananda spoke of awakening the power, he seemed not much to be in favor of siddhis. He would say that, well, they are true, they exist, but they can, trap the novice and they can lead towards a fall, which is true. It's a traditional view of the Vedantin. But Sri Aurobindo says that, well, if it can lead you towards fall, you have to become strong enough and gain it, because powers are inevitable in the course of our evolution at some point of time. They are nothing else but hidden capacities in human nature. Only they have to be placed at the service of the divine. We have to purify ourselves of all egoism. But they will awaken. So this was something unique to Sri Aurobindo, where there is a slight difference. Because when he speaks of power, it's about the power of the light of Brahman awakening within man. This sense of inferiority and incapability. He was reminding Indians, don't know who you are? You believe you are an inferior race because some people come and tell you that you are inferior. Look at the man. He goes all around and comes back. Man in the real sense. He is. If there is one person being really fit to be called man, it is Swami Vivekananda in the deepest sense of the word. So when he comes, man in the sense of the Upanishads, the Purusha, the one who is, one with the soul within. That's what the Purusha means. So when he comes to, as a compliment, the Shakti had to also awaken. So that we find in Sri Aurobindo, because awakening the Purusha is not enough. Every woman carries the Shakti within. So when Swami Vivekananda comes after a tour day world, and somebody asked him, Swamiji, you were such an Indophile, loved India and spoke so highly. Now you have seen Europe and America and all these. What do you say about, what do you feel about India now? So he says something very interesting. He says, well, before I left for, America and Europe, India was always sacred to me. But now after I have returned from there and seen through the mask of glitter and glamour, the very dust of India is sacred to me. So this was the man, the leonine man, the sage, the yogi. And he really brings into mind after a long time the yogis, the rishis of yore. Unlike in between, we see certain mystic movements, a misguided mysticism, people saying some nice slokas and some dohas and some whatever it is in different languages, speaking about God being there and His nature. But the dynamic current of spirituality was missing, and Swami Vivekananda comes and awakens it. Man's entire sadhana consists in kindling this fire of the Brahman, the flaming tongues of which will purify him by consuming all impurities in order to manifest the blazing forms of the vast in whatever he does and creates. So, in a sense, he is saying that the low is the state in which we do it. If the Brahman is awakened, even the lowest of the low can be turned into a sacrament and divine blaze. How shall this fire be kindled? He says something very interesting. Swami Vivekananda, he is mighty intellect. Only three intellects one can think about before Sri Aurobindo. I am saying Sri Aurobindo is the sun in which all lights are there or get absorbed. But before Sri Aurobindo, there are three mighty intellects which come to mind from the spiritual point of view. One is Buddha, the second is Shankara. Strangely, he seemed to have a reason to cancel him but reaffirmed him. Very mighty intellect. And the third is Swami Vivekananda. Mighty intellect. And but the beauty of Swami Vivekananda, as I would say, not opposed to but different from Shankara and Buddha, is that Swami Vivekananda has something to say on many world issues. You speak to him about the French Revolution, he will speak about it. You speak to him about the history of India, he will speak about it. You speak to him about the Americans, the England, Europe, their nature, he will speak about it. You speak to him about the Japanese, he will speak about it. So there is a wideness in Swami Vivekananda which connects us to the world. You speak to him about the life in India, its villages, life in America, he will speak about it, which is different from the way Shankara and Buddha gave noble truths, high truths for man to live by. They were general principles. But here is Swami Vivekananda who understood life at the very roots. And that, of course, we see in Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Not only they know about this life to the roots, but they are pouring into the roots of life where falsehood has permeated the waters of divine love to purify it, and the blazing light of the sun of divine truth to rejuvenate it. How shall this fire be kindled? What does Swami Vivekananda, the mighty intellect, has to say? By Shraddha. Same thing. When we read Sri Aurobindo, he says two things are important. Faith and will. If they are there, everything else will come. By the power of faith alone, a man becomes as is his faith. He is completely echoing the Gita. That as is our faith, so we tend to become. A man becomes whatever he has faith in. So if we have faith in that we can find a way to cure ourselves from within, we will end up finding a way. But if you have faith in that there is no way that man can cure himself, just to take an aside, a little dig, but he has to depend only on outer pharmacopoeia, then he will remain dependent, because as is our faith, so we tend to become. That was an aside, not to be quoted in public. So, now what does Sri Aurobindo say? This was Swami Vivekananda. What does Sri Aurobindo say about him? Some of the key things. Vivekananda was a soul of Piyusa if ever there was one, a very lion among men. But the definite work he has left behind is quite incommensurate with our impression of his creative might and energy. If you read through him, it looks like the whole world. He is hovering around like a ball of light and fire and lighting up everything. But as I said, that form which is needed, all things need to manifest, the truths need to manifest through forms, through new structures. The old institutions had to be broken. But what had to come in its place? Something new, which is more ready to take the soul of man to his further ascensions. That's what Sri Aurobindo spoke about. With freedom, plasticity, the new institutions have to come. That he remains silent upon. He said it will take care of itself. We perceive his influence still working gigantically. Behold, Vivekananda still lives in the soul of his mother and in the souls of her children. So it is with all. Not only are the men greater than their definite works, but their influence is so wide and formless that it has little relation to any formal work that they have left behind them. So we cannot measure him by in terms of his writings and speeches, because his influence continues and his soul continues to work for the glory of Mother India and for the glory of the world. Then there is a passage which Sri Aurobindo quotes, which is what I just expressed. And in this sense, he connects with the wider sense of spiritual liberation, or wider sense of spiritual working or spirituality, which we find in Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda. Otherwise, up till then, there is a tendency towards individual liberation. If you see the saints of yore, even the great sages who inspired creeds and cults, though they did speak about serving humanity, but it was not by seeing the Narayana in man. So Swami Vivekananda speaks about Daridra Narayana, and he surely was not speaking about Daridra in terms of outer poverty. He spoke about serving the Daridra Narayana in man, in sense that man who is impoverished in his intellect, impoverished in his heart, he can think low, he can think very small, his thought is moves in a very small circle. His heart, which is cabined within narrow ideas of thought or feelings, his life, which doesn't have a tremendous impulsion, he's logged into small little selfish ends. And he didn't speak about the body, but obviously the body is an instrument. So he was freeing us from that. Daridra, this is a state of poverty, before which outer poverty means nothing, because he himself lived a man with outer poverty. In fact, he had such a beautiful reliance that he knew that whenever he needs something, which it will come. There is a very beautiful interesting anecdote of Swami Vivekananda, that when he was traveling once, he felt hungry, and but there was nothing to eat, and he waits, no problem. So see, the difference is that the yogis also feel hungry. It's not that they don't feel hungry, but unlike the man of the sansari man who is rushing, oh, let me get something, the yogis are its master, and if they cannot get, then they know how to wait. So what happens is that on the next station, he was in a train, and somebody comes and he says that I saw a dream in which Ramji came to me and told me that, please carry these sweetmeats, and Swami Vivekananda, of course, we know, was very fond of sweets, and give it to the man in saffron robes who is traveling in this place. And he came. He didn't know Swami Vivekananda. So he was a man who, in the literal sense of the Gita, was living by the truth of Yogakshem Vahamyam. Dedicate and devote yourself entirely to me, and I shall look after you. So, Daridra Narayan, which he spoke, is not about people who are poor outwardly, as if the rich don't deserve, liberation. Many times the rich are much more poorer, because inwardly they are many times poor. So, this is often quoted or misquoted to mean that, you should go and, give food and blanket. This is not what a man like Swami Vivekananda would say. He is speaking of Daridra, Narayan who is inside, the divine, the Lord. And he is wearing the garb of outer Daridrata, a Vipannata. So, Sri Aurobindo quotes him and he says, I have lost all wish for my salvation. Look how it starts. It's not about, it's about salvation, freedom from ignorance. May I be born again and again. May I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries, so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls. Now mark the words. And above all, my God, the wicked, my God, the miserable. Look here, the word miserable, a state of inner misery. My God, the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship. Who is the high and low, the saint and the sinner, the God and the worm? Him worship, the visible, the knowable, the real. All bodies are bodies of God. The omnipresent, Break all other idols, in whom there is neither past life nor future birth, nor death nor going nor coming, in whom we always have been and always will be one. Him worship. Break all other idols. So this is Vivekananda, who when he bids us to do Daridra Narayan Seva, he is saying that first enrich yourself, awaken that flame within, then go out into the world as torches of light and kindle the fire within all, so that all may be replenished and become rich with this inner richness, and all else will come to them, outer wealth, hegemony, everything else. And then Sri Aurobindo commenting on this says, the last two sentences contain indeed the whole gist of the matter. The true salvation or the true freedom from the chain of rebirth is not the rejection of terrestrial life. See how wrongly we understand that. Then he is saying that the one who is neither past nor future but the present, as if he does not believe in rebirth. No, that's not the case. He says the true salvation of the true freedom from the chain of rebirth is not the rejection of terrestrial life or the individual's escape by spiritual self-annihilation. Even as the true renunciation is not the mere physical abandonment of family and society. One can be with the family and the society and yet be a renunciate. Sri Aurobindo is a great example of that. And of course the mother. And Swami Vivekananda, even though he outwardly rejected, he was with the world fully. It is the inner identification with the divine in whom there is no limitation of past life and future birth, but instead the eternal existence of the unborn soul. He who is free inwardly, even doing actions, does nothing at all. So they are the people who don't glorify them. Swami Vivekananda, when he said I, Vivekananda says so, it's a realization he is speaking about. But there are many who would glorify in his name. He who is free inwardly, even doing actions, does nothing at all. See is the Gita. This is the state of Neshkarmanya. This is the state where inwardly you are doing nothing but doing everything. Or everything is being done through you. For it is nature that works in him under the control of the Lord of nature. And finally, it is very interesting. The last bit which I am going to read is the last passage of the last paragraph of the last writing in Karma Yogi, which means after that Sri Aurobindo embarks to Pondicherry. So we see the transition, and here comes the kernel of the relation between Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. He himself is declaring it. This is from Karma Yogin, volume number 38, 26th March 1910. The work that was begun at Dakshineshwar is far from finished. It is not even understood. That which Vivekananda received and strove to develop has not yet materialized. The truth of the future that Vijay Goswami hid within himself has not yet been revealed utterly to his disciples. A less discreet revelation prepares, a more concrete force manifests. How beautiful. Less discreet. It is not through thunder and storm that the force which is going to come, he is presaging it. The victory, the advent of a new world is not announced by the beating of drums. So he says, a less discreet revelation. Many will not know it. God shall grow up while the wise men talk and sleep. So something else is going to come which will be less discreet. A more concrete force manifests, but in its impact it will be much more powerful. That's what he meant when somebody asked him that it seems there are very few people who will be following you. He said, yes, if the new consciousness demanded the old way of casting itself into the mold of a system or religion, there would be many followers, much more than any religion so far. But it seeks new expression. It is something totally new, and that's why its impact will be far reaching. But it will not be seemingly as stormy as up till now, the spiritual movements. And that is the work of the avatar. But where it comes, when it comes, none knoweth. A less discreet revelation prepares, a more concrete force manifests. But where it comes, when it comes, none knoweth. It was to come in Pondicherry. It was to come from the junction of the two continents, from France. It was to happen in a small little town, perhaps not even a town, but yes, a town in the southern tip of India. So that force was to manifest there in a less discreet way. If you look at the samadhi of Sri Aurobindo and in the ashram, everything is there so wonderful, but not like some mega structures built around it. And from there, a new force is animating the world, is entering the world and transforming it. So this was the work which was Swami Vivekananda, as I said, like the morning star who came in the night and pointed the way toward the sun to one who has to come. He was invoking the sun. When he came to Sri Aurobindo, he was saying, "You be the holder of that sun. Come, hold it." And Sri Aurobindo is the sun. The difference between Vibhuti and an avatar, he is the sun who comes to open the way toward the future. Vivekananda frees this world from the clutches of the past. And in a way, he hints that what the future could be if we could awaken to the real truth of what the past represented. And we see that Sri Aurobindo comes and gives us the way and the direction of the future, which is all about the yoga of transformation, which is a whole subject in itself. Namaste. Oh, there. Well, that's a very wonderful question because it directly connects in a way to Swami Vivekananda. Now, Vedanta is derived from the Vedas and it is called as the end of the Vedas. That's how the word Vedanta comes. So, what happens if you read the Vedas? Vedas are all comprehensive and it's very difficult to get their true inner sense because the whole thing is very complex. And so, Vedanta was the essence of the Vedas which is relevant to us in terms of our inner spiritual growth. That is Vedanta, which is primarily, the Upanishads, which is taken out from the Vedas. They are not from, somewhere else, but they are things which are relevant in terms of the spiritual aspects of our life and how we can discover it and, by recovering it, how we can obviously grow into spiritual being, spiritual strength, because all the rest will follow. But it is very interesting that at one place, Swami Vivekananda says something very interesting. He says that it is difficult to, sometimes the Vedantas do get lost into intellectual systems. And it is not, not necessary to go into that. What we can really do is, if we really want that ancient truth, is to go back to the Vedas. This is what he says, which is something very amazing. Because, ultimately the seeds are in the Vedas. And this is what we find with Sri Aurobindo, that he takes up the secret of the Vedas. And even though he has commentaries on the Upanishads, there is a reason why he takes up the Vedas. Because as a system of yoga, in its profundity, in its details, in all its different aspects, we find in the Vedas the path to the great goal. So Vedas are like entirely, in fact, profoundly psycho-spiritual scriptures. As we take up the journey, what are the forces we encounter, how to start the journey, how to initiate, but not in the modern language, of course. It's like the fire of aspiration, which is lit up by rubbing the two, woods. That's how the Vedic rishis would describe. So keep one wood below and keep one above. So then the fire is lit. It's the higher and the lower consciousness. They come in contact, the fire is lit. Then there is the journey. Then cosmic forces come in. There are, powers that oppose. There are powers that help. And eventually through all this, you reach that point where you discover the one within and the one everywhere. So that's Vedanta. That's Vedas. Now Vedanta took another approach. It says, yes, ultimately you reach the one. So just concentrate upon the one. So Vedanta takes up that aspect. Isha vasyamidam sarvam yad kincha jagatyam jagat. So it takes up that one who is dwelling within, and by meditating and concentrating upon him, of course there are different Upanishads with slight turn, but primarily it concerns with the realization of Brahman. But the problem with that is that sometimes, there are wonderful scriptures and without a doubt, but the problem with that is that, how to really connect it with life. There are seeds which are there, especially in Isha Upanishad. And somebody had to make the bridge between those seeds and the truths as they would manifest in lives. That Sri Aurobindo does. Similarly with the Vedas, the profound journey the great spiritual truths which were given only to initiate, because Veda is a path, it's a yoga, it's not a book, it's not a scripture. It continues to unfold itself. There is no limit to the Vedas because they are infinite. We limit them to the 4 Vedas, but Veda by their very nature is a journey of the infinite to the infinite, but the infinite who has compressed himself into the small, into the infinitesimal. So Vedas are that, is the complete journey. Vedanta culls out its essence. So Sri Aurobindo also liberated this secret of the Vedas, because by doing this he was connecting the great past to the future. Otherwise there are religions which have sprung up in even in India, which cut themselves off from the Veda and start saying that we are different. Well, if you cut a branch from the root, you are bound to shrivel up, because it's only by connecting that you draw the strength. Otherwise it will become a very limited branch, and how long a limited branch can sustain itself? So that's the difference between Vedas and Vedanta. And of course there is Tantra, which Sri Aurobindo brings in. Swami Vivekananda has that aspect but doesn't openly speak about it. But his worship of the mother, when he goes to Shir Bhavani and comes and says, "Oh mother, rain on me, misery, sickness, everything," because he started adoring Kali like Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, we know that how Totapuri, when he came, the Vedantin teacher, he showed him the truth of Tantra. He taught him the truth of Tantra. Where is it? He was a Vedantin. So that synthesis of Tantra and Vedanta we find in Sri Aurobindo, which is hinted again in Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. So basically Vedanta is about the Purusha aspect, the one divine who is in everything and everywhere. This is the passive divine presence. Tantra is about the dynamic divine pulsation which is in creation. And it is about the divine Shakti which has gone into creation, manifests itself in multiple ways and blossoms in countless ways. So we can say that Vedas and Vedanta primarily speaks about the eternal sun who is ever shining in the firmaments. And Tantra is about the rays, sun rays, which touch and make the earth filled with colors and seasons and beauty and wonder and charm, awaken in man the aspiration to unite with the sun. So that is the basic difference. So Vedanta and Tantra, and in Sri Aurobindo we find the perfect culmination of these. Swami Vivekananda himself, actually, there is a passage, now I don't remember where, he does speak of Vedantic systems, and he says that they have got into intellectual thought, whereas one should go back to the Vedas to discover the original. But he didn't have the time, I suppose, to really bring out those truths into the open. He did one of his famous quotes from the Upanishad. There are wonderful things, as I said. Na yamatma na pravachane na medha na bahuna shrutin. And na yamatma balhinen. This the divine, the one, is not for the weak. So there are beautiful passages. But Vedas are comprehensive and complete. Vedanta picks up the intellectual and final spiritual side and presents it to the world. So it's easier to comprehend for the intellectual mind. Vedanta, the Upanishads. Yeah. Yes, please. तो वही, जैसा कि मैंने पहले भी कहा कि स्वामी विवेकानंद बाहर से रिनंशिएट थे, अंदर से कर्मयोगी थे. हाँ, आपका प्रश्न स्पष्ट है, मैंने पूरा सुना. तो जैसा कि मैंने कहा कि स्वामी विवेकानंद बाहर से रिनंशिएट हैं, लेकिन अंदर से वो कर्मयोगी हैं. ये बिल्कुल आपका बिल्कुल सटीक और सुंदर ऑब्जर्वेशन है. इवन उसके पहले, ना केवल 98 पर, उसके पहले हम उनके अंदर ये प्रवृत्ति देखते हैं. हाँ, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, ये स्पष्ट रूप से देखते हैं वो. तो हाँ, तो अब कर्मयोग, श्री अरविंद भी उसको एक स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट के रूप में डेफिनेटली वो कहते हैं कर्मयोग इज द मोस्ट वाइडेस्ट वे. मतलब सबसे अगर कोई कहा जाए कि द वाइडेस्ट वे टू एंटर इनटू द योगा इज थ्रू द कर्मयोग. ये क्योंकि कर्म में इंक्लूजन है. हाँ, ज्ञान योग में एक टेंडेंसी है टू गो बियॉन्ड. भक्ति योग में जो एडोरर है, जो वर्शिपर है, वो भक्ति में लीन हो सकता है अपने इष्ट के साथ. लेकिन कर्मयोग एक ऐसा मार्ग है जिसमें हम संसार से भी जुड़े हैं और संसार की सारी ऊर्जाओं से जुड़े हैं. तो उस सेंस में ये बिल्कुल कॉमन एलिमेंट है श्री अरबिंदो और स्वामी विवेकानंद में कि कर्म की प्रधानता है. लेकिन ये स्वामी विवेकानंद ने भी कहा है, लेकिन श्री अरविंद ने इसको बड़े स्पष्ट रूप से कहा है कि कर्म शुड बी इंस्पायर्ड बाई ज्ञान. बिकॉज अगर ज्ञान विहीन होकर अगर कर्म होगा तो अपने मार्ग से हट जाएगा, एंड उसके कोर में लव होना चाहिए, एंड दैट इज लव फॉर द डिवाइन. सो डिवाइन नॉलेज और डिवाइन या डिवाइन विजडम और डिवाइन लव, ये कर्म के पीछे सदैव होना चाहिए, क्योंकि अगर वो ना हो तो हम कर्म में भटक सकते हैं. और इस प्रकार से उन्होंने तीनों को, वास्तव में तीनों का उन्होंने समन्वय किया जैसे गीता में है. लेकिन इसके साथ ही श्री अरविंद इस समन्वय को केवल ज्ञान, कर्म और भक्ति की त्रिवेणी ही नहीं, उसके आगे ले जाते हैं. विवेकानंद में भी इनकी त्रिवेणी है, लेकिन कर्म बड़ा प्रधान रूप से आता है टुवर्ड दी एंड, और प्रारंभ में ज्ञान का रूप आता है. भक्ति का है उनके अंदर, लेकिन इट कम्स मच एज ए अंडर करेंट, बहुत स्ट्रांग नहीं आता है, क्योंकि वो ज्ञान योगी हैं. एक इस पर मुझे याद आया, जब श्री रामकृष्ण परमहंस से किसी ने पूछा कि ब्राह्मण क्या है, तो उन्होंने नाग महाशय से कहा कि बोलो नाग महाशय ब्राह्मण क्या है. तो वो कहते नहीं, ही आज की हाँ ब्राह्मण क्या है. तो नाग महाशय कहते मैं तो डस्ट ऑफ योर फीट उससे भी नीचे हूँ, तो मैं क्या कह सकता हूँ, आप ही ब्राह्मण हो. और जब स्वामी विवेकानंद इतने में आते हैं तो उनसे पूछते हैं कि नरेंद्र ब्रह्म क्या है, तो विवेकानंद कहते हैं आई एम ब्राह्मण. तो ये जो एक कर्म योग का के साथ ज्ञान योग का सुंदर समन्वय हम स्वामी विवेकानंद में देखते हैं. भक्ति है अंडर करंट में श्री रामकृष्ण के प्रति, हालांकि उसमें भी उनको बाद में कहीं कहीं पर डाउट्स आए थे. जो एक फेमस एपिसोड है जब वो आई थिंक देवरा बाबा या कहाँ पे गए थे, जहाँ पे श्री रामकृष्ण उनके पास आते हैं और कहते हैं कि मैंने सब कुछ तुझे दे दिया, अभी भी तेरे मन में डाउट है, क्योंकि उनके अंदर ज्ञान बहुत प्रबल था और कर्म की भाव था. और भक्ति एक रूप लेती है मनुष्य के अंदर भगवान की सेवा. तो श्री अरविंद के उसमें प्रेम बड़ा प्रोमिनेंट है. वो लव को कहते हैं द क्राउन, एंड द भक्ति और सरेंडर को श्री अरविंद मुख्य चीज बताते हैं अपने योग में. तो कर्म के पीछे भक्ति बड़े एक स्ट्रॉन्ग टेंडेंसी है श्री अरविंद के योग में. हम यहाँ तक ये कह सकते हैं कि भक्ति ही, भगवान का प्रेम ही कर्म के लिए जब हम प्रेरित करता है, तभी हम वास्तव में दरिद्र नारायण की सेवा कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि वो नारायण की सेवा है. तीसरी चीज़ जो हम देखते हैं कि श्री अरविंद अपने इस समन्वय में, इस त्रिवेणी में शरीर की यात्रा को भी जोड़ लेते हैं, क्योंकि यदि शरीर रूपांतरित नहीं होता तो बाकी चीज़ें तो आधी अधूरी रह जाएंगी. तो इनर रियलाइजेशन के साथ आउटर चेंज, ये भी एक नई चीज़ श्री अरविंद जोड़ते हैं, क्योंकि नहीं तो क्या होगा, सिंथेसिस में वो बताते हैं कि हम अंदर में तो परिपक्व रहेंगे, अंदर में लिबरेटेड रहेंगे. स्वामी विवेकानंद वाज इनवर्डली फ्री, लेकिन बाहर में हम ट्वाइलाइट वर्क्स ऑफ इग्नोरेंस करेंगे. और इसका उदाहरण, एक छोटा सा उदाहरण जिसके साथ वी कैन क्लोज दिस क्वेश्चन इज कि अब एक डॉक्टर है, पुराने योग के हिसाब से वो अंदर में भगवान को रियलाइज़ कर जाए, लेकिन जब वो मरीज का इलाज करेगा तो ट्रेडिशनल दवाई जो भी हो, एलोपैथी, आयुर्वेदा, और वो कहेगा कि भाई अंदर में मैंने भगवान को ऑफर कर दिया है, भगवान क्योर करेंगे, पर ये दवाइयाँ ले लो. ये एक ट्रेडिशनल योग की पद्धति. अभी भी ऐसे योगी हैं जो इस प्रकार से जीवन को देखते हैं. लेकिन श्री अरविंद इस चीज़ को यूँ कहेंगे, मनुष्य के अंदर भगवान है, मनुष्य के अंदर हील करने की क्षमता है, तो उसको अवेकन करना चाहिए. नाउ दिस इज समथिंग न्यू, कि मनुष्य के अंदर हिडन पावर्स हैं जो डेवलप होनी है, और उनको डेवलप होने के लिए ऐसे मनुष्य चाहिए जिनका मस्तिष्क, जिनका हृदय, जिनका देह सबल है धारण करने के लिए. स्वामी विवेकानंद इसको हिंट करते हैं जब वो कहते हैं यू मस्ट हैव नर्व्स ऑफ स्टील एंड प्ले फुटबॉल. लेकिन इस चीज़ को फुलनेस का जो पार्ट है वो श्री अरविंद देते हैं, रूपांतरण की बात, जिसके बिना हम वास्तव में भगवान को बाहर प्रकट नहीं कर सकते, मैनिफेस्ट नहीं कर सकते, एक्सेप्ट इन ए लिमिटेड वे. थैंक यू.